No, because I had heard it was in very good shape. But no.
You heard those chants. That was terrible. I mean, it was,
he could have. Well, the people were very angry.
They're saying, "Hang Mike
Because
Pence."
it's common sense, John. It's common sense.
Ooh, that was Donald Trump telling ABC's Jonathan Karl that it was common sense for the angry MAGA mob on January 6th to threaten the life of his own vice president. It's just one of the many revelations in Karl's new book, Betrayal, the Final Act of the Trump Show. Among other things, Karl reveals that Trump fired Secretary of Defense Mark Esper on the recommendation of the guy who formerly carried his bags for him, 30-year-old John McEntee, who Trump picked to lead the White House Personnel Office. Secretary Esper's offenses, according to McEntee, included focusing on Russia and promoting diversity in the ranks of the military, which it seems were considered betrayals of Trump's mission. The book also covers the lunacy of Trump's allies who pursued baseless election conspiracies, including the claim that wireless thermostats made in China might have been used to manipulate voting machines in Georgia. Trump actually asked his director of national intelligence to look into that one. Karl also discloses that during the insurrection, the official vice presidential photographer was in hiding with Mike Pence at the Capitol. However, Pence refused to allow Karl to publish any of the photos from during the siege, despite the fact that the photographer's salary was paid by U.S. taxpayers and the images are public property. There are also some unflattering details about former financial journalist and current Trump media personality Maria Bartiromo of Fox News, who reportedly called Attorney General Bill Barr to complain that the Justice Department wasn't intervening in the election to keep Trump in office. Barr told Karl, "She called me up and she was screaming. I yelled back at her. She's lost it." Joining me now, Jonathan Karl, ABC News chief Washington correspondent, author of Betrayal, the Final Act of the Trump Show. Here's the book. I hope people will pick it up because when you think you cannot learn anything weirder about Donald Trump, it gets weirder. But you open the book talking about the scene, and I've heard this before from other people who've interviewed Trump, about the way he sort of puts himself on display at Mar-a-Lago. Not because he had to, because he could have gone somewhere more private to have a real interview, but he wanted to do it in public.
This was, first of all, this is in March. So this is just about 2 months after he's left office, barely 2 months after January 6th. So everything is raw and fresh. He invites me down to Mar-a-Lago to do the interview, and the interview takes place right in the middle of the lobby.
Yeah.
Big towering ceilings, the ornate walls, and he has the interview happen right before dinner time.
Yeah.
So you actually hear on that tape people coming in for dinner, for happy hour. And I was looking for something. Book interview is different than a television interview. You can take a step back. There's no cameras. There's a level of intimacy you can have. This was, I wanted to see any hint of regret, any hint of remorse for what happened on January 6th, and you hear it.
None.
Absolutely not.
You actually describe him in the opening of the book as being sort of gleefully vengeful, that the sense of vengeance is what made him happy?
He was in a good mood. Okay, so he's talking about how awful all these Republicans were who betrayed him, that if Mike Pence had had more courage, if he had done what he wanted to do, he'd still be president, the terrible things that Bill Barr had done to him, that Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell had not fought for him, and he was like, it got him excited.
Yeah. Do you believe, having sat down with Donald Trump, looked him in the eye and talked to him, that he genuinely believes the election was stolen, or that this is just an act because he doesn't want to admit that he lost?
So I believe that he has come to believe this. I don't believe it was always that way. I believe that this was an act. He knew it was very strategic. His whole brand is based on the fact, I'm the guy who wins.
Yeah.
So if he loses, it's done.
Yeah. So
he had to at least convince his supporters that he had not lost. But I think now, I had one final conversation with him over the phone over the summers. I was about to go to press. And he was telling me that Texas was going to do an audit of the vote, too, which now we know. But I didn't even know it yet. He was telling me, I was like, this doesn't make any sense. You won Texas.
Right.
What are you talking about? And he just got so agitated with me that he ended up hanging up the phone. He was no longer in
So you think he believes it?
I think he believes it.
And you talk about Kevin McCarthy here.
Yeah.
You're right that it's not clear to you, and I've had the same theory, that Kevin McCarthy would automatically become Speaker if the House were to flip to the Republicans, because despite the fact that the minority leader has done everything he can to kiss up to Trump and to make up with him, he'd probably really rather have like a Jim Jordan.
Well,
and
yeah,
it's not clear the caucus would even support Karl.
Right, to support
Karl, support McCarthy. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, look, Mark Meadows, who is still very close to Trump and doing everything he can to help Trump out, Mark Meadows has told people that he wants to bring McCarthy down. I mean, so, you know, we'll see. The thing is, what McCarthy has going for him is who else can get a majority?
Jim Jordan.
Well, first of all, Jordan has been very close to McCarthy. McCarthy has brought him in. You know, he kept a friend close.
Yeah.
He's even closer. And so I don't think Jim Jordan would challenge him.
What about this idea? Because there is the assumption, you know, that a lot of people are making that Donald Trump is putting in place all of the pieces that he needs, taking down all of the people who resisted. And as you said, he's extremely vengeful, which is a lot of what this book is about, about everyone he thinks betrayed him and didn't keep him in office. And that he's putting all the people and the flunkies in place that he will run again in 2024 and then be triumphant. You're saying you don't necessarily believe that.
Look, I mean, he may run. People around him say that he's definitely running. He's off to the races, and certainly Donald Trump wants us to believe he's running because that's what makes him relevant. But I don't think he's going to run. I won't be shocked if he does run. But that said, he is putting in place. I mean, he is going out methodically to defeat and to destroy anybody that was not with him in his crazy drive to overturn the election. I don't know how successful he's ultimately going to be in that. I mean, we will see how this goes, but it is an effort to take out anybody who wasn't sufficiently, not just the people that voted to impeach him in the House, but this is obviously local officials. I mean, one of the moments that I thought was very significant during the transition is when the Michigan Republican leaders, these were Trump people, and their constituents were solidly Donald Trump, and Trump summons them to the Oval Office in late November and says, I need you to reconvene the Michigan legislature and send, you know, take back those Biden electoral votes and send Trump votes. And they told him flatly no.
Yeah.
He doesn't want those kind of people around anymore.
And he's working to get rid of them.
And he's working to get rid of them.
What about...
Not with across-the-board success, by the way, but he's working to get rid of them.
You also write about some of the sort of interesting characters, you know, the Sidney Powells of the world. Yeah. Did Donald Trump genuinely believe that they were capable, that this crew of people, including the pillow guy and all those, and Rudy Giuliani, were actually capable of keeping him in office? Well,
it's interesting that there's a dramatic scene when he's confronting, when Bill Barr, after Barr has said there is no election fraud, and Trump is like screaming at him in this meeting in the dining room off the Oval Office. And Barr says, look, first of all, your legal team has been a clown show. And if you had any chance of challenging anything, you needed to have the best people in there from the start. And Trump actually says, well, on that part, you might be right. So I think he understood that. But you mentioned the conspiracy theories, the thermostats, the Chinese thermostats, the Italian military spy satellites that supposedly switched votes, the Gina Haspel, you know, got injured trying to secure a server in Germany that controlled all this stuff. I mean, I can't say that, but crazy stuff, okay?
Yeah.
But here's the thing. You can find it on QAnon. You can see it in the outer fringes. This was talked about in the Oval Office. And the President of the United States was pushing it, and his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, was demanding you mentioned Ratcliffe, the director of national intelligence, told him to look into it, told the Department of Justice to look into various things, and over at the Pentagon. This was, I mean, you can laugh about it, but this is what was driving the top levels of the executive branch of our government.
And I guess the obvious question I have to ask you is, you've talked to him, you sat across him, he says he seems to believe all this stuff. Did Donald Trump come across to you as somebody who is rational, mentally all there?
It's a very strange thing. He comes out, he's gregarious, he's got a way of trying to charm you. He doesn't seem like, he's somebody that's completely insane at all. I mean, he conducts himself, he conducts his business. But it's the lack of any sense of remorse, I think, that really comes across as there's something that's just not right. Yeah,
very clear. Betrayal is the name of the book. Jonathan Karl, excellent job.
Thank you.
And you're going to want to read this one. It is a page-turner. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. And up next, celebrations in Oklahoma as Governor Stitt actually commutes Julius Jones' death sentence just hours before his scheduled execution. His mother and his longtime friend join me next to share their elation at the last-minute reprieve. We'll be right back.
I've got moderate to severe plaque psoriasis.